Coming up on the Louis Diaz podcast.
You know, like I fell in love with that feeling of just being in over my head and just neck deep in something that was so unfamiliar.
Hello and welcome to the Louis Diaz podcast. Every day I come across some of the most incredibly fascinating and authentic people from all walks of life. And together, we're inviting you in to be our special guest as we take you through some of their amazing experiences, adventures, and journeys. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy this episode of the Louis Diaz podcast. So, Louis, where are we off to today?
We're going to go to Africa, I think, where my journey's really sort of kicked off, and maybe also boot over to Mongolia for a little bit.
Amazing. I can't wait. So, Africa's a big continent. Are we talking all of Africa? Or?
Well, Tanzania specifically. Tanzania was a place that I lived for 3.5 years, and I kind of call it my home more than I call, Australia my home. Intrinsically anyway, like in my heart, definitely.
Cool. So where did the journey start? Take us all the way back.
Well, I guess when we chatted about the idea behind the podcast, and I said to you, my values are sort of non-linear living, that started for me a really long time ago. We hadn't spoken about it much, but my family are Jehovah's Witnesses. I grew up, and if you don't know much about Jehovah's Witnesses, essentially you could sum it up by saying doomsday cult, if you were going to be really nasty about it. But so it was a strange upbringing where I sort of learnt quickly to step outside of the immediate community and ideas and sort of venture out on my own. And through that, started to learn a lot about indoctrination, learn to sort of go out on my own and trust myself and follow my own ideas. And that continued to permeate throughout my high school. We grew up in a very athletic high school, footy players.
Surfy kids.
Yeah. And I sort of was a muso and just, always lived up in the hills and had dreams about traveling. And finally, when I was able to go out on my own and travel, the first place on my list was East Africa. And I headed to Tanzania when I was 22, when a lot of people I knew were going to Southeast Asia because that's where you sort of went on your first big trip. But I had ideas to go over there and volunteer. And once I got there, my mind exploded. It changed me forever, really.
Wow, that sounds incredible. So right now, we're on the back porch. Has this been your family home for a long time?
Probably, yeah. I've always grown up in the hills, but this particular house, my parents have been here since I was 18.
Yeah, because this is a beautiful location. It's green, it's hilly.
It's lovely. I mean, I actually just live around the corner with, share a house with 5 people right in the national park. And it's, I couldn't think of anywhere else that I'd rather be in Victoria.
Yeah, it kind of feels like a bit of a Lord of the Rings type of journey because this kind of feels a little bit like the Shire.
It's what I tell people all the time. I'm like a hobbit coming back to the Shire, and it was funny that it wasn't until I left and people would constantly ask me about my home and I would describe, the temperate rainforest and the national parks that I really, developed that, I guess it's iconic ideas about home, like home is where the heart is and no place like home. Those idioms sort of rang true to me when I was away. It really made sense and I miss this place and I love coming home to it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I guess that's the beauty of home, right? It's coming home.
Definitely.
So you went to Africa when you were 22 as your first destination. How did you make up your mind to sort of go to Africa?
I mean, I'd watched far too many Attenborough documentaries in my teens and also movies like Baraka and Samsara that really sort of gave me this wide-eyed sense of adventure. I just wanted to go places. And to me, the most sort of remote or the most intimidating place I could think of going as a 22-year-old was Africa. It just seemed like this mystery, and everything I knew about the, safaris and the animals, I'm a big nature lover and a big animal lover. I was like that. It needs to be there, it needs to be in East Africa somewhere on a savannah. And as all my adventures, they start off as lazy sort of musings and then they move into maybe a bit of a rough idea. And then I just say, I'm going to book it, I'm going to do it and get out there and then see what happens. And that's sort of how it came about.
So it turned from like a lazy musing into a rough idea into suddenly you're on a plane.
Yeah, that's how most of my adventures happened. To be honest, I wouldn't say I'm the most comprehensive planner. It's more just get myself there and work out what I'm going to do once I'm there.
I mean, everyone's got their own sort of way of doing things, right?
Yeah, or not way of doing things.
So talk to us about that feeling when you were on that plane and you were going to this place that you probably hadn't seen much of ever.
Yeah, I don't know. I was like, I guess because I was young and very naive, like I didn't really know what to expect. I remember like at the time thinking like, I'm a bit of a fussy eater. What am I going to eat when I get there? Really sort of green thoughts that you have no idea what you're really in for. And when I finally arrived in Tanzania, I think it was a 40-hour journey through multiple countries and small planes, like a Cessna from Kenya to Tanzania with chickens on board and stuff. Like, it was a really strange experience. And by the time I rolled up in Tanzania, I had my luggage was missing. I didn't have any malaria preventative, but I was outside an airport that had closed with mosquitoes biting me, and I was a little bit in over my head. But I fell in love with that feeling of just being in over my head and just neck deep in something that was so unfamiliar.
Yeah, it can absolutely captivate you when you're in over your head sometimes, hey?
Yeah, definitely. And East Africa especially, like the people, they smile with their eyes. And although I was terrified and night was approaching and I had no idea where, the company I was volunteering for were going to come and pick me up, like the people, like it was my first experience of super friendly people in a place that, I had no idea about. And like it's that lateral experience and that, my ideas around, it's a 50% Islamic country. My ideas around religion, my ideas around, Africans and things like that. It changed everything.
Yeah. Went totally out of your comfort zone and you learned something completely different day one like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you were there volunteering, and how long were you supposed to be volunteering for?
I was there for about maybe about a month or 3.5 weeks or something, teaching English in small schools in a town called Moshi, which sits just under Kilimanjaro, which is the Africa's tallest freestanding mountain in the world. And it was, living in this like old 2-story embassy building that had just been gutted, and sort of walking through villages every day to go out to little schools and teach in schools, and the volunteering experience. I'm a bit skeptical on African NGOs now, knowing a little bit more about them, and that's not fair, not African NGOs, but the NGOs that I dealt with, like I didn't actually now feel like I accomplished much as a volunteer, but I felt like I got everything out of that experience. Like it taught me a lot, and I returned to Tanzania as a fully qualified teacher 6 or 7 years later and spent 3.5 years there, which is where I felt I made a bit more of a difference for sure.
Yeah. So I guess the experience of volunteering itself, maybe in that first instance, you didn't feel like you made as much of an impact as you wanted, but it sort of put the fire in the belly, if you will.
It definitely put the fire in the belly.
So it served a purpose of sorts, really.
Yeah. It taught me a lot about myself and taught me a lot about the world, and definitely opened up the floodgates as far as my wants and desires to involve myself in lateral experiences like that.
Yeah, because let's face it, I mean, you were 22, right? You could have gone on a Kentucky tour.
Yeah, I could have. Although, even back then, that didn't have that much desire for me. But I mean, there was plenty of frivolous activities when I went to Africa as a 22-year-old as well. Like I certainly wasn't all about the cultural immersion, and not as much as my later travel experiences. It definitely changed for me in my late 20s.
So you did the month in Tanzania, you came back and you had this, I guess, like I said before, fire in your belly. What happened? You came back here and you worked?
Yeah, so I was a year into an education degree, and I'd sort of got into teaching because I didn't know what else I wanted to do. I was a musician before that, working in bars, but I knew that teaching sort of provided me the freedom with time to be able to do things, and also if I wanted to travel, which was a bit of an idea before Tanzania, that I would be able to travel with teaching. And so when I came back, I just wanted that degree finished, and I just wanted to use it to travel. And when I did finish the degree, I did travel, and I traveled a lot. I moved to the Middle East for a year. I did some work and traveled all through Southeast Asia and India, and then finally got a job back in Tanzania. And I was working as a teacher, but I was trying to work as little as I can and take months off to go and do some adventures, and then I sort of formulated ideas about maybe bigger adventures, which is when I came up with the idea to hitchhike from the east coast to the west coast of Africa, like through the southern countries.
And tell us about that.
I mean, there's so much to tell, and it was sort of a kickoff into a different type of travel for me. It was, it was a bit more planning, and still not as much as would have made people I know feel comfortable, but it was just an idea to get myself from one part of the continent to the other part, to see as much as I could. There was so many beautiful things I wanted to do along the way, and to then really sort of, again, put myself outside of that comfort zone, which was, the whole point of the trip, really. As much as it was seeing the beautiful things there, it was to teach me a lot about myself, and, that's where it started. But through that trip, I spent time with mountain gorillas in Uganda, which is what turned me into becoming a photographer. And I kayaked the Okavango Delta and camped in the Delta, went across the Namib Desert, hitchhiked with a South African guy through into Namibia and all the way across to the Skeleton Coast, and, saw so much of the southern section of that continent, which I couldn't do it justice even talking about it. I tried to with my photography, and since I've had it back, I try to a lot as well, but it's something that you have to go and experience. Like, it's an experience.
Yeah, you can't just tell someone about it. They need to go and experience it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, we were talking today about, some of my favorite experiences. Like, definitely the thing that changed my direction was mountain gorillas in the southern section of Uganda, and that, that's like traveling into it's called the Bwindi Impenetrable Forest, and you just go into this, like, out of the savannah where you're looking at tree lions and elephants, and you come into this misty forest where you spend the night, and you can hear, colobus monkeys and things around you, and you wake up and you walk out, and you just start walking up this hill with some rangers, and as the nervous tension sort of starts to build and they know where the family's going to be, you then sort of pop out somewhere and there's just a large family of mountain gorillas sitting there, and for me that was it was something I'd wanted to do for a long time. It was a really surreal experience, and there was a French guy there taking photos, and I sort of thought, that's what I want to do. Like, I want to take pictures of things, I want to capture these moments and share them with other people and inspire them to go out there and have those experiences too. And that's when I moved home and spent the money I had saved for a mortgage on a camera and a course.
So how many of your friends at the time thought you were crazy?
You know what? I'm really lucky. I've got amazing friends that have always been incredibly supportive. But it's a constant battle for me to check in with myself if I'm crazy. Like, I do have funny ideas about things, and I'm like, is this the most sensible thing I should be doing, or should I be following the wider community? And again, like, with these ideas that I gained when I was younger, sort of breaking outside of what I perceive to be a harmful community, I see things in society which I think, for me personally, are a level of indoctrination, like that whole social milestone. I need to have this by a certain age and this by a certain age. And so that's, for me to sort of fly in the face of that and buy a camera and now sort of think about leaving again, like, yeah, it's a very different idea. Like, my friends are very supportive though.
No, that's amazing. As long as you've got good support around you. Yeah, we can think we're crazy at times when we go on these journeys. And I guess all I could say to you is that I don't hear many stories of people's day-to-day lives that make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up like your journey through Africa with the gorillas just did.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
I got little shivers up my spine. The way you describe it as well is incredible. The misty forest and the monkeys.
Yeah,
So,
it's an incredible place, you know, and you know, the other thing that those experiences taught me as well, like I'm really active as far as activism, as far as environmental activism and things like that, you know, and the best thing I think those experiences give you, other than, you know, perhaps wanting something a little different for your life, is an appreciation of our natural resources and how beautiful our planet is. And when you see places like that, you know, like the ideas of losing them is terrifying, and you become far more concerned with conservation than perhaps if you've never experienced that. I mean, how could you if you've grown up in an estate in the southeast suburbs of Melbourne? Ideas of conserving, you know, I think we have like 800 mountain gorillas left or something. You know, it's a very small amount. You wouldn't even think about it. It's not something that would cross your mind. So these lateral experiences, you know, they change everything about you.
So, you know, you talked about getting into photography, you talked about getting into filmmaking. How do you sort of use those crafts to share the experiences that you've had with other people?
Oh, I mean, it's difficult to use them. Like, I'm still really working that out myself, you know, trying to build an audience of people that even care about the sort of experiences that you have or these things is really tough. The way I try to use it is, you know, snap these pictures and, you know, maybe write something it's important. I was in Tanzania again last Christmas. One of the head elephant conservationists was assassinated, and it was a time for me to, I felt, fly over and really use some of the skills that I'd learned, use the Swahili that I knew, and try and have these discussions on camera about, you know, really complex conservation issues. And I'm stitching together a short film at the moment. I think it'll only be like 8 or 9 minutes long, but, you know, and hoping to partner with conservation organizations. So using the camera to try and tell a powerful and important message. And I don't know that I always do that well, but for me personally, I just think that, yeah, I could use it. It could go one of two ways, right? I could learn to shoot models in Bali or something like that and get millions of Instagram followers, or, you know, I could go over there and shoot elephants and you know, leopards and things like that and try and tell important conservation stories. And to me, that's the point of photography, is to tell and inspire people to get out and see things for themselves, or to look at things in an inspirational way.
Yeah, so I had a look at some of the footage just briefly before on your computer, and like the imagery looks so bright, colourful, like vibrant. You can really feel the energy of the places that you're capturing through some of those close-ups shots that you use as well, on the feet, walking along. It's almost like I could hear the sound of like footsteps on gravel or something like that. So it certainly looks like you've polished up your craft a little bit, and there's no doubt in my mind that people would love to watch your documentary. Do you know what it's going to be called yet?
It's got a working title at the moment. Yeah, it is and has been called Full-Bellied Morals, essentially because I flew over there trying to project my ideas of what conservation and what poaching meant to a Westerner from Australia, and I very quickly learned about how complex the issues are in Tanzania, poaching issues, and what happens at the lower level, and the ideas around poverty, and the working title Full-Bellied Morals sort of came about from, you know, understanding that it's pretty easy for us to project our sense of morals onto issues as people that don't have an issue eating or finding food or looking after our children, and that, you know, perhaps we should be investing, rather than telling people how to conserve, maybe investing a bit of more time into local people and helping them fix their own issues, and, you know, rather than sort of saying that we know better. So it was a bit, it's the film's changed a bit recently. I've had a few help from some friends and cut it and got rid of a few things, so it's still taking its shape. But hopefully, at the very least, it will inspire people, which is what I would like it to do.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. So you were 22, you went to Tanzania, you came back, finished your degree, went back to Tanzania and Africa and did some great work over there. And it feels like your journey is sort of taking you on a path where you've become more and more passionate about conservation and sharing those messages. And so what's next? What's next on the journey?
Sure. Well, it's funny. So that time in Tanzania that I spent recently, last Christmas, and my ideas around poaching really put the fire back in my belly for those lateral experiences and travel. And I think having moved back to Melbourne's got a way of sucking you back into it, and it's a very hard place to live if you're not working constantly and trying to make money. And I came back from that with, just some big ideas about getting out of here again and, putting myself out of that comfort zone and learning a bit more. And I just kind of felt that, I don't have a mortgage, I don't have children, and I was in a long-term relationship at the time, and I just felt very stagnant, like I wasn't moving forward. And I kind of thought to myself that, the world doesn't need people to just sit still. And I felt there was a lot more to be learned. So I had a very, very understanding partner at the time, a Canadian girl that moved back to Canada and has is studying sustainability now. And she was extremely supportive, and that's allowed me to sort of formulate my ideas to go to Mongolia, which I'll be doing in about 6 weeks, to shoot some photography on a horse riding trek and hopefully learn a bit about horses. And the aim would be to sort of maybe get my own horses at some point and do a bit of trekking around Mongolia on my own, shooting pictures there. That's, the standard Louis idea of amusing that might turn into something, like it's sort of coming about, and I'll get off the plane again and see where I'm taken to.
It's good. At least you've got a rough idea and you know that you're flexible enough to sort of go with the flow. Whereas, it's not like an itinerary, that you plan. It's like, all right, this is what I want to do. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. And I'm a firm believer that, the really important things in life, they happen when you're out of that comfort zone. Like if you're not feeling challenged, if you're not feeling scared and terrified, then you're probably not, I don't have big enough ambitions, and that's, I grew really comfortable being back here, and I don't think I need comfort. Not yet anyway. Like at the moment, comfort, it's not giving me anything. I think I need to be, out of that comfort zone again and sort of learning a bit more and experiencing a bit more and hopefully doing some good while I'm on those experiences as well.
Yeah, it sounds incredible. So 6 weeks to Mongolia. So I think I caught up with you, bumped into you really, like for the first time maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. And yeah, I hadn't seen you in so many years.
No, it was at the Equinor protest, wasn't it? Yeah.
At the Equinor protest. You were there filming. That was, to be honest, my very first protest. Just happened to be around the corner from where I live. But I actually saw some stuff on Instagram from a guy that we both know, and you work pretty closely with, at times, Matthew Hannon.
Yep, Matty.
And yeah, I was like, oh yeah, that looks like a really good thing to be involved in. And when you told me about your trips to Africa and your upcoming trip to Mongolia, and that you were going in 6 weeks, I was just like, seriously, I must catch up with Lewis. I must catch up with him and talk about this stuff and podcast it. So, look, I just want to say massive thanks for taking time out of your day, your weekend, to be here and share these stories with me and the rest of the world.
Cool, man. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
I'm not sure who's going to be listening just yet, but I know whoever does listen, you are in for a treat. And what I want to do with you guys is to share some of Lewis' photography and maybe a little snippet of his upcoming film potentially on the website, so that you guys can get behind him and follow along on his journeys as he continues to trek around the world out of the comfort zone, living the
non-linear living.
The non-linear living, yeah. And I think every one of us needs to experience, at least for a little bit in our lives, a bit of non-linear living, so that we can, develop an appreciation for the actual world around us, rather than the the world on our phone screens or our TV screens, right?
Yeah, it'd be lovely. I mean, that's the aim.
Is there anything that you wanted to leave our listeners with before we pack it up today?
I don't know. That's a pretty tough question.
Loaded.
I guess, look, as I said before, the aim with the photography and things like that is that there are a wealth of experiences out there. I know that the way I seek down experiences is not for everybody as well, but there are important lessons to be learned, especially with nature in regard to conservation. I mean, I think it's the most important time in human history to care about wildlife and nature. And that I guess I would reinforce, through whatever medium you can to sort of learn about those things and work on conserving them.
Amazing. So where can people find your content and follow you?
I'm mostly Instagram based, unfortunately. I haven't found another way to do things yet, but it's just Sonder_media.
So SONDER _media.
Media.
I think you guys know how to spell media. Well, look, it's been amazing sitting out here on the back porch of your family house with the beautiful birds, and you really did take me away to a different place on your journey today. So I just want to say a big thanks, Lewis. Let's shake on it.
Cool, man. Thanks. It was very nice to hang out.
Yeah, definitely. And let's give it I think I did this in my practice runs. I just do a customary round of applause when we finish a podcast. So on 3, 1, 2, 3.
Both of us.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. I'm
good.
applauding you. Cheers, bud. Thank you.
Cool,
Thank you.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Louis Diaz podcast. To find out more about any of our guests and catch additional photos and content from this episode, simply visit louisdiaz.com/podcast or find us on Instagram at louisdiaz.podcast.